show sponsors the Corn School, RealAg on the Weekend, and ATP Ag. ATP is your home for NutriScan, a game-changing handheld tool that delivers real-time, in-field nutrient insights in minutes. And when it's time to act, ATP's foliar products give your crops the nutrients they need to deliver their genetic potential. Find out more at atpag.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Agronomists. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and I am super excited about this evening's conversation talking about foliar feeding. Lots of questions, of course, to answer tonight. Before we get to that, a reminder, if you collect those CU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Tomorrow morning, let us know you watch the show, and we'll get you signed up for those credits, of course. Would love to know where everyone is joining us from in the comments. Some familiar faces there. And yes, send us your crop report. Jim, I'm feeling a lot like you. It says he needs to get some crop emerged to foliar feed it. Goodness. We've got plenty of corn up here in the Ottawa Valley. I saw my first field of soybeans emerged, but it has been cool and damp, not wet, just cool, and very cloudy. So would love to know where everybody is at. And that will, of course, work into our conversation tonight. Let's bring in our guest. I'm super excited. Jarrett Chambers, first time on the show, ATP Ag, and Dale Cowan with AGRIS Co-op. Jarrett, we'll start with you. Where are you based? Tell us what you do with ATP Ag.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me on the show here, Lyndsey. So I'm based just outside of Winnipeg in Oak Bluff, Manitoba, central Canada. And I'm actually one of the founders of ATP Nutrition. Been in business about 15 years and looking forward to tonight's show because, again, we focus in on the importance of plant nutrition, how biostimulants can work with plant nutrition, and, of course, our analytical technology, especially in terms of leaf tissues, real-time analytics to see, do you need to supplement your crop because something's out of balance?
We are absolutely, I'm sure tonight, going to get some questions, and if not, we'll bring it up about how we know what we need to be adding. And so tissue testing, I'm sure, will come up as well. Now, Dale Cowan, where do you hail from, sir? Reminder.
Well, I live in this village of Embro near Woodstock, but I work for a company called AGRIS Co-operative, and they're headquartered down in Chatham. So our whole trading area is west of me. So basically, if you drew a line from London to Sarnia and straight down to Lake Erie, everything south and west is where I operate. So
Now, how do the crops look?
I would say surprisingly well for the most part. We're still waiting to plant the last acre of corn and soybeans in places. We have some farmers, of course, been done. We're done end April, and others are just finishing up now, and some got quite a few soybean acres to go yet. So I would say overall corn's probably 95 to 98% planted. Beans would be somewhere in that 25 to 30% yet to go in places.
Now, Jarrett, we can see you regardless of the smoke, but it has been incredibly smoky. Is that seeming to impact the crop at all, or it hasn't been long enough yet?
Not long enough yet, but if we remember a few years ago with those fires in Alberta, it definitely impacted productivity. Just photosynthesis was gone down, and we had a little bit of good reprieve today in our small geography. A little pattern came through from the southwest corner, kind of up through central Manitoba, and it got rid of the smoke for the time being. For the time being.
Yeah, well, I hope it rains further north to put out some of those fires. To alleviate some of that smoke, of course, and let some people go back home. We shall see. It is an early start to the wildfire season. That is true. Okay, so we've got a lot on the table tonight when we talk about foliar feeding. Dale, I'll start with you. And I think this is an important place or important thing to sort of break down is where foliar feeding fits in maybe the overall nutrient package. Is it just about fixing a problem, or could it be part of a bigger plan?
Well, it could be all of that. And it's, first of all, it's nothing new. It's been around forever. And what's changed, of course, is the products and our understanding of using them. But foliar feeding's been around for a while. We've had numerous trials the United States have tried for years and years to show a yield response with foliar feeding. It's been inconsistent at best, but we've tried it. So for me, in our neck of the woods, we look at what's really working, and that's some of the micronutrients on a foliar application, things like manganese on soybeans and wheat. And manganese is probably our most deficient micronutrient in the province, even on vegetable crops, more so than anything else. And next after that would be boron. So manganese is unique chemistry. It gets oxidation reduction reactions in the soil, make it more or less available. So a foliar application is how we've been amending our soybean crops, and the yield responses have been sometimes very small to sometimes, up to 20 bushel the acre, but typically we're looking at 5-6 bushel yield response when the deficiencies are there. You have to do it early, and sometimes you have to do it more than once because it's not mobile in the plant. So we manage expectation with the customer up front that you may be doing this again 14 days from now on soybeans. And so that's been the sum total of our major experience. Not that we aren't doing other things, but that's pretty much the standard practice here on micronutrients for foliar.
Mm-hmm. And Jarrett, so same question from your perspective. How does, foliar feeding, and we're going to talk a bit about why it works well in some cases and others, but how does it fit into a bigger or broader question of nutrient management?
Well, I think that's, great question. I mean, a key thing, Dale really nailed most of the points. So thank you, Dale, for that. I mean, at the end of the day, a couple of key messages. It doesn't replace a strong soil fertility program. I think we got to be sure we soil test, we get a strong fertility program, but at the same time, Dale commented about manganese and boron. There's other elements that it's in the soil, but the plant can't always acquire them in the timeliness that it needs.
Right.
So the foliars complement a well-balanced soil program. Former nutrients critical, time into that nutrients critical, never let those deficiencies show themselves. So their fit is basically what I kind of sometimes coin many phrases. One of them is that little and often approach. Give it that 7 to 10 days. Some people say 7 to 14 days. I'm not going to argue the duration, but just give it a little bit of nutrition to complement what's happening. Ideally, if it's early on in the season, we maybe want to drive that rooting. Maybe that nutrient acquisition is limited for, could be moisture reasons, could be placement reasons, could be lack of vigor, cold soils, whatever it is. Get that plant going, acquire those water and the nutrients out of the soil, access that bank account. And then, of course, as indicated, we have some limitations of nutrients in the soil and uptake by the plant. We also have mobility in the plant. So it really complements it. And again, I think we want to start early, and then we just move it through the season depending upon what things look like in terms of our tissue work.
So Dale, it brings up, I think there's two ways of thinking about this as well. So exactly that, we think about the soil test, we think about what's there, what we've applied, what the soil will provide. But then, we do, at times, we want to go and top up with certain nutrients or correct a deficiency. And Jarrett sort of alluded to it there with potentially a tissue test. What sort of diagnostics are we using when we're thinking about, the micronutrient side or perhaps a rescue treatment? Walk me through that process of how you anticipate or diagnose a problem like this.
Well, Jarrett started off with a good ground gain. You got to have current soil tests, but there are some micronutrients that I would argue that a soil test doesn't do a very good job of predicting response. And one of them would be manganese, and the other would actually, in my mind, be boron. Jarrett may have different opinions, but the soil test really doesn't differentiate between responsive and non-responsive soils very well. So the other thing is, what crop are we growing? What's the crop's responsiveness to those micronutrients? Can we soil apply some boron? We put a lot of boron on corn at side dress time with UAN, put a little bit in the starter. We're starting to look at some foliar products at fungicide timing, at reproductive stages. So there's some things that were wrinkled, but we depend a lot sometimes. If you're an experienced agronomist, your visual cues are what you're looking for symptoms in the crop. But more often than not, if you're in working with new clients and new fields, a tissue test at certain critical growth stages will help out. There was a time when we had critical levels for crops at very specified times, very specified leaf position. I don't know how current any of that research is anymore. So what we're getting is companies that are using large databases to say, well, you're low, you're medium, you're high relative to everything else at this growth stage in your area. I'm a little jury's out on that for me, but I think with where we're headed with computing power and AI, that might actually yield something that's going to be extremely valuable from a predictive. You want something that's going to be descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. So you want to be able to, this is what's going on. This is what's going to happen if I don't do anything about it, and here's what I do about it. Here's my ROI. So those are the things that we go through at present time.
Now, Mark's got a great question, and Mark, I promise we're going to touch on that to talk about tank mixing, but we're also going to talk about how plants actually absorb some of these nutrients and how they move. But Jarrett, before we move to that, sort of to build, I saw you nodding along with Dale, so I want to give you a chance to weigh in on that as well.
No, it's great. I'm just agreeing with Dale. I don't want to be redundant. I think there's lots of topics to cover, so let's just keep on rolling.
All right. Now, if you have questions, I will. Everyone in the chat. I know that we do get questions on other episodes as well about tissue testing. So if some of those come up, please drop them in the chat. I know there's always questions about sort of when and where and all those things. So if those come up, please do drop them in there. So, but what I wanted to do, Producer Jay, if you could bring up, I think it's slide 3. It's the pH. What's available and what pH range of Dale's. If you could bring up that slide, because I think that fits in as we're talking about, I'm sort of visualizing this discussion. We're going to talk about maybe from like the top down, thinking about the addition, but also from the bottom up, thinking about what the plant can actually access. So we will talk obviously and have about manganese, boron. I think zinc comes up quite a bit. We can probably talk about as well. And for some reason this year, everyone wants to talk about sulfur as well. But Dale, walk me through when you're thinking about, what could be deficient and when. How does pH play?
Well, so maybe many don't know how to read this chart, but wherever the bar graph is the widest is the area of maximum solubility or availability of the plant. So as you see, as we go to the left, the pH goes down. You see the bars narrow up. That means availability goes down. If you move to the right, it also narrows when you get to high pH because availabilities go down. So there's that sweet spot of 6.8 is the perfect pH all the way down to the bottom there. If you look at the bottom, 4 or 5, that's where the micronutrients are. And particularly if you start looking at manganese, you see once we get above 6.5, that bar starts to narrow. So the availability starts to decline. So one of the clues when we get a soil sample back, what's the soil pH? What's the likelihood of impacting on manganese availability? What's the soil test level say? What's the history been on the farm? What's the farmer's experience been with foliar symptom? What's the tissue analysis say on the history of this farm? So the pH, this is where it all starts in my mind, is what's the characteristics of the soil, and is the soil going to be able to supply these nutrients, and the impact that the pH has is pretty significant. And also it speaks to the idea if you need limestone is follow the pH and buffer pH and don't over lime, because if you raise the pH too high, you will surely induce a manganese deficiency. I've seen it way too many times. So that's kind of where the start. And the one on the right is for muck soils. It's a totally different animal. Same sort of guiding principle. Just as much lower pH for optimum nutrient because there's just no mineral content to it at all.
Mm-hmm. Jarrett, you're in Manitoba, and
Yep.
we were having this conversation earlier or last week. We were talking about peat soils. Are peat soils and muck soils the same?
As a general rule,
Generally?
they're
Okay.
generally the same. People will use them interchangeably. I mean, generally at the retail level, a lot of times people just talk about peat soils. But again, just a high organic matter. Very high organic matter.
Because certainly there are peat soils in Manitoba that if Janet is here, hello Janet, she farms some peat soils, and some of the questions she comes up with, I just think maybe just move. Peat soils don't seem worth it. They just are highly challenging. Okay, so not many things. Sure, Dale, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the soil on the left might have a cation exchange capacity that ranges from 5 to 30. The one on the right, cation exchange capacity could start at 40 and run to 100. right? And it's just all organic matter. There's no mineral soil. There's no aluminum toxicity in these soils, which is why you get away with a lower pH for availability. There's just no aluminum toxicity. So,
yep. It's fascinating. They really are. Okay. All right. Now we've got some questions coming in, and actually I see that we've got some that are being texted in because they can't comment. But one of the key questions, Jarrett, I'll start with you, is, and we had a guest on this show a while ago with the thought that, plants are meant to eat, quote unquote, from their roots, but it doesn't mean that we can't get nutrients in from their leaves, and we actually depend on things like herbicides, fungicides, etc., being taken in by the leaf. But when we're talking about a foliar nutrient, why is it so important to understand how the plant itself can actually take it in and take it out?
Well, that's critical. I mean, if we think that you think about the root system has to acquire nutrients out of soil solution, take that and even accelerate it even more in regards to foliar application. First point, people say nutrients going through the stomata. That's less than 5% going through the stomata. That's your air conditioner. That is not where nutrient acquisition occurs. That's where you're actually managing your transpiration in the plant. Where the nutrition goes in is that in all of these stomata, when a stomata opens and closes, it has these hinges because it opens and closes tens of thousands of times. Along that hinged part, that is called where the polar pores are. That is actually where the nutrients go in. And this is also because this is actually where, because that stomata has opened up thousands of times, the wax layer is actually less there. So this is actually where you have a point where you don't have that challenge between the water-based product going in and the wax on the surface. It's also why on the underside of the plant, there's twice as many stomata, a lot less wax to deal with the sunlight. So nutrient acquisition is a lot greater. Now, the purpose of a foliar is to feed the plant now, right away. We also need to have it. There's a whole bunch of criteria to get there to be sure that the plant can utilize it as properly as possible, because we don't want the plant to have to expend energy to put that nutrient into available form it can use in the photosynthetic pathway outside of calcium and boron, which are structural nutrients. But outside of that, so what do we want? We need a soluble product. We need a product that's really small. We need a product that can handle a high level of point of deliquescence, that it stays in solution for a lot of moisture levels. We want to be sure that, again, ideally, it's in a form that the plant can easily convert into the nutrients that it needs. Again, so you think about it, every nutrient that goes in generally has another element associated with it. If we look at Dale's case in terms of manganese, a lot of times manganese sulfate is a common source. So what's the value? The value is manganese, but the other value is sulfate. So, but if I want to think about that differently, if we want to use something like a manganese chloride, all of a sudden now we get the right amount of manganese. We could actually be getting too much chloride. It will drive into the plant quickly, but again, it can actually create this challenge and actually damage the tissue. So we want to get into the plant quickly, right humidity, just below the point of burn. So that it gets into the plant quickly, utilized by the plant, and very mobile in the plant. Insoluble products, delayed release, slow release, long-term products, that is not the place for foliars. That is a soil applied long-term management plan. We got to get into the plant quickly. That's what it's used for. And there's so many other areas to go, but I think hopefully I captured a couple of things.
Dale?
Yeah, I agree with all that. And quite often it's the formulation, right? It's what's in the product. Are there humectants? Are there penetrants? Are there stickers, spreaders? These things augment the application, not so much some do absorption, but if the point of deliquescence is you need certain humidity over leaves, these products don't dry out. Once they dry out, they're not of any value. So using humectant that just attracts moisture and keeps it wetter longer, basically. So those premium products tend to have those extras in them that drive some of that uptake. So yeah, I agree. It's very critical.
Can either of you spell how do you say it? Deliquescence? Anyway, I think it's
yes.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great.
It's in my slide.
Yeah.
There we go. We'll find it. I know somebody mentioned it. I think it's a racehorse name. I don't think it's actually a thing. I think you're all goofing me. But they're okay. Yeah. Which slide?
It's a $50 word for saying wet.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, but it will be memorable for everyone. That exactly that it does drive home the point of the importance of
right.
keeping these nutrients right in that solution when so that it hits the plant can then actually take it up, because there's no point in applying something that by the time it hits the plant is no longer in solution and
Yeah,
really
yeah,
or so quickly is out of solution, and the
yeah.
plant as I said, plants can't eat rocks, right? They've got to
Yes,
drink it in those ways.
yes.
Okay, Mark's got a question, because of course we talk about micronutrients, and that makes sense for lots of reasons. But Mark says we have very high soil test K, but our tissue test K comes back very low. pH is 7.2. Will foliar be able to get it into the plant? So we don't usually think about it from a
Yeah.
K perspective. Jarrett, do you want to handle that one first?
Well, it's a great question. We got tons of examples where it's worked, and tons of and examples where it works and hasn't worked. Depends upon the analysis you've done. We've seen soils. In fact, we had a great experiment here. It wasn't an experiment; it was a retail experience that they had, where they actually had potassium levels coming back at 500 ppm. Of course, they also had potassium deficiencies. They also had boron deficiencies. These are getting common things. In that case there, we picked up on it. We actually treated the field, but we left a whole bunch of checks, because what a great opportunity, because the retailer was very confused, rightfully so. 500 parts per
Right.
million potassium deficiency. So again,
Yeah.
foliar application there temporarily fed that plant for 7 to 10 days. Help that plant along, never replace it. In this case here, we actually, that K potassium boron, which is they're brother and sister, they're totally tied to each other. Great response in regards to this trial. I can't remember, it was a 5 or 6 bushel response. Now the other reason is, in this case here, some of the labs don't look at the K to mg ratios, so we also have to think about some of those K to mg ratios. They were out of whack. So even though the soil test says what's the exchangeable potassium that soil should supply to the plant during the season, should supply, doesn't mean it actually supplies it, because again, we can't look at a nutrient in isolation. We have to look at, in this case here, K to mg, pH, look at the calcium ratios, a whole bunch of different variables. And again, the tissue sample not saved this crop, it allows us to preserve the yield that we had, and we didn't have that yield drag as much as we would have without it. So we've seen this a number of times. We see it, and it's not isolated to certain areas. I always say, look at the KDMG in the soil. Don't be surprised your potassium levels off. And a lot of times, look at your boron numbers, because man, I'll tell you, those things are brother and sister with each other.
Dale, is that if we have sort of an induced potassium deficiency, is it because it's somehow unavailable in the soil? Is that what's happening?
Well, I think it might be physical more than the availability.
Okay.
The idea that it moves by diffusion. So how active is the root system? How big is
Right.
the root system? Is there soil compaction? Is the magnesium really high in the soil? And is the soil tight? So yeah, that KMG is a factor as
Yeah.
well. So moisture certainly plays a huge role, and how much nitrogen has been applied,
Right.
right? So all those
Right.
things play in on that, and not so much the pH, but I would say I would be really looking at soil structure, and I'd be probing that soil just to see if there's a hard pan, and are the roots in the seed furrow and they're not getting out, sidewall compaction. There's lots of things that physically I would be really investigating pretty heavy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark has some homework.
Yeah.
Get out there. Get
No.
out. Go and look. Okay. Jarrett, go ahead.
No, I think we're doing some really neat work with some groups in regards to monitoring actually water acquisition through moisture probes. And then we're actually been monitoring tissue levels. And what we're seeing, to Dale's point, is in these dry seasons. Last year was a great example. We did some work in southern Saskatchewan where we actually saw nutrient uptake actually was limited in that top 0 to 6 inches, because it got so dry, and nutrient uptake was occurring lower in the profile. We were monitoring that through soil moisture, and as a result, what triggers it? Your two immobile nutrients get into trouble. Potassium, phosphorus get into trouble, and of course, you have this staggering effect. If you got a dry soil, your root systems are down. You got a low organic matter soil. Your boron levels. I mean, heck, most of our boron levels are all deficient. I mean, 80+% are deficient. And again, so now we trigger this whole piece. So to Dale's point, we have real case studies with analytical work showing that this moisture tying with these nutrients alters, impacts rooting, and ultimately impacts nutrient acquisition.
Okay, so we're going to go to our first clip. Producer Jay, we're going to go actually our second clip with Erica Dowling to talk about boron, because it is definitely one of the other micronutrients that comes up quite often when we talk about foliar feeding. So Producer Jay, if you would, let's take a look at boron through the roots or through the leaves.
Yeah, so boron, it's a micronutrient, so still one of our essential nutrients, just not necessarily needed in as big of a quantity as what we would talk with some of our macros, like our NPK and S that we're talking pounds per bushel that we're having uptake. This is more of a 1 or 2 grams maybe in canola, for example, per bushel. So not very high amounts, but still really important role.
And now when we're talking boron, it's different how it acts in the soil versus how it acts in the plant. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that?
Right, so especially here in Western Canada, most of the crops that we grow in canola, wheat, for example, we don't see a lot of mobility in the plant. So the boron is not really moving. If you do, say, a foliar top-up, it can kind of help out at the time of application, but it's not going to move within the plant very much. So that makes us kind of look at the soil and what our options are for getting it into the plant through the root system and making sure that our soil has boron to feed our plants with.
So what are some of the conditions that might actually indicate whether you have adequate boron in your soil or not?
So it all comes down to kind of what your parent material, what your soil structure is like. So if we have a field that has really good organic matter, maybe comparing that to a sandier field, we tend to see a lot more boron coming from that field that has higher organic matter, because that's what's going to be where we're going to see mineralization and kind of see that boron coming from. So if we look at a sandier field, maybe a field with irrigation as well, we often see deficiencies there because boron is a really soil mobile nutrient. So it'll move within the soil profile with moisture. So if it's a light sandy textured soil and we're seeing lots of either rainfall or irrigation, we can definitely see some deficiencies in those conditions.
Our sponsors for the Agronomists are ATP Ag, the Corn School, and RealAg on the Weekend. Real Agriculture is pleased to present RealAg on the Weekend with host Sean Haney in partnership with Broco Radio in Saskatchewan and the Chorus Entertainment Network in Alberta. Listen live Saturdays at 4 in Saskatchewan on 650 CKOM Saskatoon and 980 CJME Regina, and on Sundays listen at 2 p.m. in Alberta on 880 CHED Edmonton and QR Calgary. You can also find the show on Real Agriculture and RealAg's podcast feeds. So boron has been a bone of contention on the show a couple times. Jarrett, why is boron such a tough one to manage? We've got actually a really good slide here that maybe we'll talk about.
Well, actually, I don't think it's tough to manage.
Okay.
And you think about it. We've had zinc deficiency used to be the number one deficiency globally on the planet. It took us 20 or 30 years to accept that. We've accepted it. We've got zinc under control. We have targeted areas. People understand manganese very well. In the case of boron, it is the number one micronutrient deficiency on the planet today. And the fact is, we unfortunately have been overlooking it. I mean, the fact is, here's the key thing. We have soils that are testing incredibly low in the level of boron. Boron is mobile in the soil, if it rains, of course. And it's not mobile, it's only xylem mobile in the plant, which means it only moves from the root system up. So all new vegetation, if you don't have enough boron in the soil, you have to supplement, and you have to do little and often. Again, why boron's a bone of contention is because when people say boron is important for pollination, absolutely. But we step back and we've done so much work on this. Boron is important for cell structure, cell wall integrity. So wherever a cell is made, in the root system, in the leaf, in the flower, in the pod, all of those pieces have to be important. So we got to feed that right away. We got so many great images, and you don't have any of them on here today, Lyndsey, where we show boron deficiency and we got these leaky roots. All the roots are formed, but of course, there's no structure to them. Why is there no structure? When I look at boron, the way I simplify it to people, I say, think about calcium and boron are together. Think about a house construction. Your 2x6s on your outer walls are your calcium. What joins the 2x6s together is your plywood or your drywall. That's the boron. If you have no plywood or drywall in your house, what happens to your airflow, your heat, your moisture? It goes in and out, but we're still spending all this energy. So we have to create proper cell structure, starting at the roots early on. And we must understand the limitations of the soil. And then we need to supply little and often. And we need to look at these peak demand periods. People start looking at flowering, they've already lost all their yield. I will tell people, if you have a boron deficiency, you're questioning boron and you wait the flowering, you will get anywhere between a 0 and a 1 bushel an acre yield increase. And you've left a lot on the table. If your soil is testing low, you're not going to fix it right away. You're going, unless you have a huge budget, which I still wouldn't recommend you do it. You're going to put on soil, 1 to 2 pounds in the soil, and there's an incredibly high probability you'll still be boron deficient. It's not because the product's not working, it's because your soils are so boron deficient, and then you need to spoon feed it along for proper cell formation.
So Dale, we and Peter Johnson is texting me as we're on the show, because apparently the comments won't work for him on YouTube. I can only imagine he's done something terribly wrong. But in Ontario, at least, what has the experience been? So to Jarrett's point, so Jarrett, if I'm understanding right, we're not addressing the boron problem early enough, and therefore we're getting, perhaps not the greatest example of ROI, etc., later because we are deficient. Dale, you've done some work, I believe, on boron here in Ontario, and on this show before, we've talked a lot about trying to get a response potentially from boron, and it hasn't always worked out. So how does, in the practical context, how do we approach the boron question?
So I've been focusing on corn because, quite frankly, canola and alfalfa, it's well known, so I don't need to convince too many farmers to put boron on alfalfa or canola. But on corn, it's been interesting. Of course, well, corn would not be considered a high demand boron crop, so that was the first thing. But I had over 100 tissue samples come back, all deficient in boron every year. Soil sample back at 0.2, 0.3 part million every year. So a couple things are wrong, is either the test is terrible or I'm actually deficient in boron. So I started a side dress program, putting a half-pound boron in UAN at 5-6 leaf corn, sometimes 3-4 leaf corn. And on sandy to sandy loam ground, we were seeing anywhere from 1 to, I think in 1 year I had up to 10 bushel response, but typically it's coming in at 3 to 5 bushel response. Mm-hmm. As I move to clay soils, I don't see it. Matter of fact, in a couple of years, I probably had a small loss. Could have been toxicity. So that's been my experience. And so I've been working with farmers on side dressing UAN, or side dressing boron in UAN at half pound actual B. Seems to be working most years. Can't say it works 100% all the time. So the other thing I'm doing with that, I've got a site where I'm doing weekly soil samples. I just want to check the temporal variability of boron. Now, does boron change week to week? Does it move up? Does it move down in the soil? So no one really knows what happens to boron in July. What happens to boron in August? What's boron doing right now? And so I've got that going along on a couple of sites. And then the other thing is, there's been lots in the U.S. and the Corn Belt. It's quite popular to put boron on foliar when they do fungicides on corn. I've never understood that because boron's not very mobile once it hits the leaf. So I didn't really understand how they're doing that. But then I got looking at some other products where if you use a sugar alcohol, a polyol or sorbitol in with the boron, it greatly increases mobility. So one of the slides I've got there of the tissue shows just how xylem mobile it is. So my next test this year is saying, well, if I use a polyol boron, can I remobilize boron from the tissues at the extreme end of the plant and get it down into where I need it in the cob? So that's kind of been my experience with boron. That's where I am right now is working on corn. We have done it on IP soybeans, seems to improve oil content. But the problem with that is no one pays you for the extra oil. Right. So part of these things you need to pay back. And so boron gives us yield. Boron and alfalfa gives us both yield and protein and quality. And boron, of course, it gives us a big yield boost. So we know what the payback is in those crops. It's just the challenge elsewhere of I can use it, I can increase constituent content, I can increase tissue, but if it doesn't give me yield and no one wants to pay me for the extra quality, then really why would I do it? So.
Right. Dale, what slide is that Do we have it that we could bring it up?
Yeah, it
Slides.
is. It's the one with the
Jamie, I
picture
have
of
it
the
here.
tractor and the combine on it, I think, or the one after that.
Yeah, hang on. We'll bring it up here because there's a few questions that have come in too that I want to sort of tackle. No, next one.
So well,
Two,
let's talk
there.
about that one for a minute.
Very,
So this is
yeah.
a farmer with his own side dresser. We've been able to do replicated strips, which is how I like to do the research on farm. This is using digital technology, so we don't have to be there with flags and tape measures to mark it out, and I don't have to be there in the fall with a weigh wagon. The yield monitor picks up the data, simple analysis, yield by product analysis, and here we're picking up this year. 2023 was 6.4 bushel the acre. This is how I like to do field trials, get them done quick and painlessly, and nobody had to be there with a weigh wagon. Nobody had to be there when the farmer was doing it. We just had everything done geo-referenced on the thing. But I think the next slide is one I want to talk about. I think, yeah. So if we focus on the graph in the lower right, so I was looking at traditionally we take the ear leaf. I looked at the ear leaf, the one below that, the one below that, and then the flag leaf, the very top leaf on the plant. What you're looking at here is just the boron content. And if you look at the flag leaf, it's like 28 parts per million boron. Everything else is in the single digit. So that just proves to me that it's xylomobile. It moves up pretty readily from the
But does
roots.
not put down. Yeah.
But how do I get it down again? So this is where theoretically, and maybe Jerry wants to chime in on this, is that if you use a more mobile boron foliar source, can I remobilize and redistribute boron in the plant during that reproductive stage that gets me more yield response without having to put it in the soil all the time? So anyway, just that's a curiosity more than anything, but that's kind of where we're going. Anyway, Jared.
No, in regards to the forms, we've done quite a bit of sugar work, and the only place we've really seen a little bit of mobility is in that genetics, really in apple production, where those plants are naturally producing the sorbitols or the mannitols. We do find some very good responses there. Unfortunately, through some tracer work, we haven't been able to see the mobility in the phloem the way we would like to. Again, I think little small nuances there, but nothing super exciting in regards to that front yet in regards to the mainstream crops.
Yeah, good to know. Well, we're gonna give it a shot anyways.
Yes. Hey, it may work.
This is how we learn. Yeah, this is how we learn. Okay, so now, producer Jay, if you'll bring up Jarrett's slide with the soybean plants, talking about boron from below or from above, because this ties into Jim's question. In that, okay, so corn is one thing, and if we think about flowering period of different crops, and we think about mobility, etc. So Jim says boron not being mobile in the plant is a problem, especially in soys or canola with a long flowering period. So it can be an incredibly long time that canola is flowering or soybeans. Jarrett, does that play a role in trying to potentially meet the plant's need for boron?
Oh yeah, like there's so much there. I'm gonna explain this slide because Dale, you nailed it. This is the story. There's many stories here, but Dale kind of started me down a new path of a story, which is basically the second one from the left, where we actually we created boron deficient plants, and then we reintroduced boron into the soil. Okay, and you can actually see how, compared to the continuous supply of boron on the far right, is that plant recovered. It still wasn't as good as, of course, as the optimum, because of course productivity was lost. But you can see the root architecture is better. The above ground biomass is better as well. Now, if we go to the second from the right or third from the left, this is a single application of a foliar boron. And I love this. I love this image because this is what it's doing. It's giving that little bit of feed for 7 to 10 days. We got more roots than the check, or what we call continuous very low boron. We got a little bit more biomass above ground, but compared to that continuous supply in the soil, it doesn't compete. Should that be a surprise? Absolutely not. But what is interesting is that you actually can see the secondary effect of an increased rooting from a foliar application. The boron didn't move down, but the boron helped create better structural integrity, which means we optimize photosynthesis just that little bit more, which then feeds all the sugars down to the roots that drive rooting. So what I like to show here, The best way to fix it is get into the soil, knowing that you're still not going to totally fix it. If you can't get into the soil, understand a foliar is good, but again, you got to do it little and often, and it's still never going to be good as if you start early on. Now, when you think about flowering, to your actual question that you had, you got to remember, we all got to remember here that the rate of boron movement is xylem driven. And the rate of water movement in the plant is based off the needs of the plant, or maybe we can think about the transpiration rate of a plant. So we think about these nice big solar panels on canola or in soybeans where you have a lot of photosynthesis happening, a lot of growth, a lot of water loss. So water comes resupplied, comes with it as boron. Think about a flower, tiny flower. Think about that pod or that seed. The transpiration rate is very low relative to the leaf. So as a result, the resupply of water is required, but that the amount of water is so much less than the leaf. So less water is going there, which means less boron's going there, which means that it's for that reproductive part of the plant, it's so hard to get enough out of the soil. So even with a good soil supply of boron, transpiration rate on those reproductive parts, the plant is low relative to the leaf. So as a result, we need to top it up. Now, a long season flowering crop, we got to hit it, got to hit it, got to hit it. If you want to keep feeding those plants, you got to keep hitting it with that boron. You may want to, of course, always. I love potassium with boron because, again, I've already said it twice. They're a real brother-sister combination in regards to it. But you gotta hit it. That demand period is high. Transpiration rate on those reproductive parts is low. Soil can't always supply it. Sometimes we have a drier soil. Root system is deep. Boron is tied to organic matter level, upper level of the soil. So as a result, nutrient acquisition may not meet the demands of the crop.
Okay, so that will dovetail wonderfully into the last questions that we have. But producer Jay, if you would, we'll go to our last read of the night, and then we're going to talk application, tank mix, etc., and of course, how often is spoon feeding? But producer Jay, if you would, let's go to our last read of the night. Our sponsors for the Agronomists are RealAg on the Weekend, ATP Ag, and the Corn School. Big corn yields demand intense management. From tillage strategies to nitrogen management, hybrid selection, pest management, and more, Real Agriculture's Corn School is a video and podcast series that helps you face every moment of the growing season. The Corn School is made possible by support from BASF and Pride Seeds. Learn more at cornschool.com. All right, we have more than a few things that I promised we would get to, and it is important that we do, because there's a few different things here. Let's start with spoon feeding, because we've got a question: how often of application is spoon feeding? And Jarrett, we just sort of touched on meeting that boron demand. Unless it is being carried there by magical creatures, it's pretty expensive to drive across the field many, many times. And so how often is spoon feeding? Is that, once every couple of weeks? What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, practical or what's spoon feeding? So I think that
Okay.
is the slippery slope because
Yeah.
the piece of that $750,000 sprayer going across the field is a lot more expensive to run per acre than the cost of that nutrient. So
right.
sometimes the best plans are eliminated. But I will say, if you have an unlimited budget, I would not recommend doing this. But again, you got to be looking at that 10 to 14-day max spoon feeding interval if you want to get it along. I did some really neat work many years ago in regards to great production in the Niagara Peninsula there. And we were actually doing spoon feeding trials in 7, 14, and 21-day increments. It was a whole series of experiments. If we put on the same amount of nutrient, but we did it on 7, 14, or 21 days, different treatments, so of course it'd be less. We found as soon as we got about 14 days, our tissue sample started looking like a heartbeat. We could, the plant, it's just not enough. So again, you're going to feed that plant for that 1 week, that 2 weeks. That's really all you're going to do. But you got to capitalize on existing pass across the field, because the cost of that asset going across the field, the cost of the person running that piece of equipment is way more expensive than the nutrient, and it's not viable on a massive production basis.
So Dale, and last week's episode we talked about avoiding messes in the spray tank. When we're talking about, and Jarrett, I'll give you a chance to weigh in on this as well. But Dale, you alluded to, maybe throwing it in with a fungicide, maybe putting it in a herbicide, maybe. So what do we need to know about tank mixing? Should nutrient products be limited in the tank? Should they go on alone? What say you?
Well, I agree with Jarrett. Is you got to capitalize on every pass. So if I'm going on my in crop cleanup pass with glyphosate on soybeans, and I got manganese deficiency, that has for the longest time been a no-no because glyphosate and cations don't get along.
That's
Neither
right.
does
Yeah.
glyphosate and hard water. So putting those two together has been problematic. So there is a number of water conditioners on the market that reduce that antagonism between glyphosate and manganese. So it allows us to get on. Is it perfect? No, but I might get 80% of the manganese response and 90% of the weed control and save a pass through the field. Is it better to separate the two? Absolutely. But in someone that's got a large acreage to cover in a hurry, and we want manganese deficiencies tackled very quickly, want our weeds killed. So those things. So if you're going to mix those two together, you need a water condition that's going to allow those things to be compatible. And Jared can speak to some of his product stuff. And the other thing, when it comes to tank mixes, we rely quite heavily on companies like Jared's to do tank mixes for us. So have you done, I don't know how many compatibility studies you've probably done, Jared, probably hundreds of different chemicals and different micronutrients and say, no, that's no problem, or don't mix this together, or if you mix this together, don't use this adjuvant, use something else. So the good old jar test is always a prerequisite if you're not sure of what you're putting on. Sometimes the Enlist 2,4-D and manganese don't get along together, but certain manganese do. So there certainly is incompatibilities, and before you fill up a 1,000-gallon sprayer, take a mason jar and fill it up first. So
It is a small step to save many. Jarrett, I'm sure you get this question a lot as to, are there certain no-goes? Are there certain, things that you shouldn't do? How do you answer that question?
There's a lot of no-go. There's a lot of direct, a lot of questions are required. Dale nailed it. I mean, 4 years ago, we had 46 Excel pages of compatibilities. So now we actually have an interactive tool on our website at atpag.com. We work with all the major crop protection companies. They actually supply us their new actives. We actually look at just the simple jar test. We look at them, simple jar test that night, the next day. In fact, this year again, with the three major crop protection companies, we are doing herbicide efficacy work. And again, they will come and actually look at these trials as well with us just to see if there's an issue. So again, with the complexity of chemistry and all the different pieces, the one thing that I always say to people is be very careful if you're doing a lot of tank mixing and then you start adding surfactants. Let's be careful we don't overload the surfactants. We got to remember fertilizer, and I'm not trying to discredit anybody here. Plant nutrition is a salt. Okay, salts like to enter the plant quickly. So again, we have to be careful on our adjuvant loads. pHs, Dale nailed it. Glyphosate was easy to deal with. You could put on various conditioners to make that manganese get into the plant. Your weed control, as Dale nailed it, 8 out of 10. Not 10 out of 10, 8 out of 10. But now that we have the 2,4-D and the Enlist and the MCPA with the glyphosate, we got to watch it. We get too low in pH, we get a whole bunch of troubles, just like our group 2s. You start lowering that pH in group 2s, you could have weed control, but now you have residue left in the tank, and now you go and spray a different compound, and it doesn't work out very well. So there is a lot of, there's a lot of great success stories. I'm talking about the small percentage that are the watchouts. But I would say, and the watchouts, we've also highlighted those very clearly. A key thing in all this is, Dale nailed it. I kind of said, if you're going to balance between what's more important, weed control or addressing that nutrient issue, you got to decide that on your own basis. You got a tough to kill weed, maybe you have to sacrifice the nutrition. If you have your general weeds and you can take 8 or 9 out of 10, and you need that nutrition, then that's it. That could be a very good way to go. We also have some herbicides that are coming back into the market, new ones coming in that are a little hot. And again, they kill weeds. Those ones there we put on our website, don't mix with those because a lot of this is out of our control. So again, we really don't get it right all the time, but we really work closely with the crop protection group to try to get it right as much as we possibly can.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and the other thing that goes with that, Jared nailed it as well, is the term sequential doesn't always mean much to people running applicator equipment. If you put one thing
Yeah.
in the tank in the inductor and let it clear out, then you put the next chemical in the inductor and let it clear out. It's putting two things in the ductor at the same time is a great way to make grape jelly. So the sequential mixing gets you out of a lot of trouble if you just take your time and let things load and mix accordingly. And I've seen too many problems when everybody's in a hurry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, Jason Vote's got a great question. We are talking nutrients. We started this
Yes.
conversation with where we should, with obviously a soil test and thinking
Yeah.
about the crops as well. Uh, but anytime we talk tissue tests, and this is an interesting one. So Jason's question is,
Yep.
should we be taking a soil test when we tissue test? Every time, sometimes. Jarrett, maybe I'll start with you, and then Dale, I'll go to you. How do we sort of verify and or compare contrast between the two?
I think they complement each other fantastic. I mean, again, we're talking about Jason is an elite agronomist, so he's all over this. I mean, we basically, you look at a soil, you look at a tissue test. A tissue test is a report card, is what has happened to the plant. How does your fertility program look like? What does that crop look like today? Again, it can also help predict the future, but again, the soil is about predicting the future because you do that soil test, it says, what is that soil capable of supplying to the crop going forward? So again, a soil and a tissue test while that crop is growing is an awesome way to do it because now you can become both a plant nutritionist as well as a soil scientist to work them together. And I'm going to take that one step further because one thing we've been preaching here for 15, 16, 17 years now is taking old and new leaves. And I think that is critical because that also is another way. Not only do we look at nutrient balances, the other thing we got to look about is what is actually happening in that plant. We have mobile nutrients that we haven't talked about here really today: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium. Where do they normally show their deficiencies first? The lower leaves. Because the plant, if it's deficient in one of those four, it will remobilize into the newest leaf. If we only sample the newest leaf, we say, hey, everything's great. But if your old leaf and new leaf tissue concentrations are different, that plant is deficient. You just don't know it by taking the new
Right.
leaf. You take Jason's comment, which 100% support. You could take a soil sample, and now you can also predict what's going to happen going forward.
Hmm.
So again, old, new leaf, soil sample, giddy up. That's the way to do it.
Okay, Dale. Well, while we go to you on that one, producer Jay, if you would, thank you for the reminder, Jarrett. If we can bring up Jarrett's slide, it's the one with the leaves, or where the nutrients are, old to new leaf. I want to say it was his fourth slide. Um, Yep,
There it
that one
is.
right there. Okay. So, Dale, what say you when you're doing some of your tissue testing? Are you taking corresponding soil samples? Sometimes. Why not?
Oh yeah, we as much as we can, we like to do that. We like to do them in the same spot at the same time. And there's sometimes there's clues there. You know, if the tissue comes back low in phosphorus and elevated manganese and zinc, soil sample probably has got a low pH, right? So there's things you can correlate between soil and tissue if you know what you're looking for. And yeah, so it's just another diagnostic tool to help figure out what's going on out in the field or in the plant.
Hmm. All right, Jarrett,
Yep.
explain this one to me. How should I read this chart?
So this is our rendition of what's been published many times before. So we have the old leaves, the dark green, the young leaves are the light green. This is basically showing where will you see the first symptom of that nutrient deficiency. If we see a symptomology of a deficiency, we have lost a lot of the crop's genetic potential. So in this case here, we got nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and also nickel that are going to show the deficiencies in the lowest part of the plant first. That is because they can remobilize in the nutrients. They can move in the phloem up to the growing points to be sure that we support the reproductive parts of the plant to reproduce as a species. You have the other nutrients such as zinc, such as sulfur, such as copper, where those deficiencies and on manganese, they generally express themselves in the youngest parts of the plant first. And a lot of times that is because their level of mobility in the xylem does not always match the demands of the crop. So this is why those deficiencies show up in the youngest parts of the plant first. You look at it and this is critical when you do nutrient diagnostic. If we look at our decision tree on nutrient deficiencies, the first question is, does the symptomology show in the old part or the young part of the plant? That is critical. I mean, there's so many examples. I can use iron and magnesium. If I showed you those two leaves, they look exactly the same. The first question is, are they old or new? If I look at nitrogen and sulfur, they look exactly the same early on. Is it old or new? So this is a key thing. It's tied into mobility or limited mobility in the xylem to see if it matches the crop's needs.
I've always, again, I mean, I don't spend the time in the field that many of you do, but it always for me, I was like, yes, where on the plant is it showing a symptom? And I thought about it from the mobility perspective, but I never thought about how it was mobile, right? Whether it was xylem or flow mobile, etc. It's always just it's mobile or it's not, and no sort of thinking through. So that I think for this conversation has been one of the really cool things I've learned is which nutrients sort of move in other ones or in different ways in the plant, which I think is really cool. Now we are talking about foliar feeding, and so we did talk a little bit about how plants actually take in some of this nutrient on the leaf. Does temperature, like, are there ideal conditions for foliar application? Like, is a warmer day better, or worse? Dale, what experience do you have as far as actual application conditions?
Well, follow the same principles you do for spraying herbicides. You don't want to spray when they're stinking hot, and you don't want to spray when the plant's under stress. So the same sort of thing applies to micronutrients. To a certain degree, they're a little more benign than chemistry, but certainly conditions that encourage uptake, which are warm, reasonable humidity. Those are the conditions that probably pretty good for foliar uptake as well. So if it's really low humidity, depending on your formulation, it just might not stay liquid enough, long enough on the leaf to get absorbed. So there's all those factors, and of course, droplet size, spray coverage, all those things are factors as well that also relate to the weather. Is how fast does it dry, and what's the deposition on the leaf? Did big droplets roll off, small droplets drift? So yeah, lots of things to consider.
Mm-hmm. Jarrett, should I be waiting for a very warm day, or will a cool day suffice?
Again, Dale nailed it. I'm not gonna repeat what he said. I'll just add the other piece. I like when a plant. Dale nailed the characteristics of the features. The other thing that Dale said earlier is, I'll reiterate, is we don't want the plant under stress. Okay, so we think about the heat in the middle of the day and a plant's under moisture stress. Does it shut down respiration? Absolutely. That plant shuts down. This is why we should never do a tissue sample in the afternoon, right? Because that tissue sample can be misrepresented what's actually happening in the plant. If the plant is not respiring, those stomata are not open and closing. Nutrients don't go into the stomata, but they go into those hinges, and those hinges have to be open to get in. So again, if that plant is shut down due to stress, heat stress, moisture stress, nutrient uptake and utilization by that element may not be as efficient as we would like, combined with all the other characteristics that Dale just referred to.
Yeah, and the other thing that we didn't mention was time of day. So if you spray in the evening, all the leaves are relaxed, they're hanging straight down, so your angle of attack is very, very acute. You're not going to get good leaf coverage when the leaves are hanging straight down on a soybean plant. So early morning, they're like solar panels. When the sun comes up, they lay out to get all the sun. That's when you want to be spraying, is when the leaves are out to catch the spray. So sometimes late evening spraying because it's cooler and the wind has gone down. So have the leaves.
Mm-hmm. Now, we didn't have a chance to run the clip, but Dale, I do want to touch on this one because I think it's super neat. Talking about how spray tracks can sometimes alert you to a deficiency in your soybeans and why that is. So can you explain that for us, Dale? Because I think it's super cool how sometimes spray tracks can alert these things.
Well, especially when it comes to manganese. So oxidation reduction reactions in the soil. So when the soil is dry, it's full of air. When it's full of air, manganese oxidizes to unavailable forms. And so as soon as it rains, the oxygen gets displaced, the manganese reduces to more available form, plants take it up. So the same sort of thing happens in a wheel track, but instead of moisture, you've compressed the soil, reduced the oxygen content. In effect, you've created a reducing condition and increased manganese availability and increased manganese uptake. It's kind of telling you got a manganese problem, more so in the tracks, but also the rest of the field so it's just one of those diagnostics clues. And I kind of like it now because if you got people with guidance systems, those tracks are beautifully straight up and down the field every 120 feet. So pretty much it's been induced from traffic. So it's but in the past, I've seen grain buggy traffic patterns from the fall.
Mhm.
Seen every dual wheel tractor track from a grain drill. I mean, you can see it under this extreme conditions.
Mhm. Jarrett, are there other patterns you look for in a field potentially that might alert you to a deficiency of some kind?
I think Dale nailed it. I mean, these legacy tire tracks compaction is critical. And the other one is also the crazy thing about just cranking up your fertilizer in an area, or lowering, or accidentally lowering your fertilizer, and all of a sudden you crank up your fertilizer, and all of a sudden, again, your biomass goes up. The whole piece goes up. It's really hard to capture the yield in that, because usually it's a mistake for a little bit of a time. But anytime you see you've altered the fertilizer application at the time of planting, and the biomass looks different, and root architecture looks different, that should be like, holy cow, what nutrient am I not investing enough in? I mean,
Mhm.
that is a big. And the wheel tracks, I love the wheel tracks. I mean, that is so not focused on enough, because people will sometimes pick another nutrient that they say that's the reason. So yeah, that's the only other piece that I like to talk about sometimes, is just crank up a nutrient in your blend and just see if it worked. There you go. You did it for a couple 100 feet, cost you a few dollars, and you can see, did it
Mhm.
work?
Yeah,
Yep.
some of the other things you see are eroded knolls, so a lot of zinc deficiency,
Oh,
low organic
Right.
matter, eroded
Yep.
areas. Topsoil depth is another one. The depth to the soil layer where it's rich in calcium, high pH, 8.2, that can be a problem. Uh, and sometimes we talk about random patterns through a field. I don't believe in random patterns. That
mhm.
pattern has characteristics that are very specific to a growing condition. The challenge is to figure out what it is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes. Try and find
So
the pattern, even if,
and
Try and
yeah,
figure it out.
it
yeah,
doesn't look like a
yeah,
pattern.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think, Dale got me thinking there again. One of the things that I, was fortunate enough to stumble upon, not through intelligence, but again, our best learnings is through mistakes, is when, walking a potato field probably 20, 25 years ago, going to a sandy knoll area, and all of a sudden seeing a high load of aphids on those leaves. And all of a
Mm.
sudden you're like, hey, that's interesting, and nowhere else. All of a sudden you start to do a tissue test, you start digging into it, you realize you're low in potassium. So as a result, both potassium and magnesium are critical pumps to pump your sugars down to your root system. So what do you have? You have all those sugars sitting in the leaves, and of course that's an opportunistic path. In this case, insect that says, "I really like that sugar. Thank you very much." It's the same case in some intensively managed crops where you may have powdery or downy mildew. We'll actually say, "Hey, thank you so much, Mr. Plant, for sticking those sugars in the leaves because you're potassium, magnesium deficient. I love it. Thank you." Your disease kicks in, your insect kicks in, and of course, if you look at the root architecture there, it's usually a limited root architecture because of that, because there's no sugars to feed the roots to drive the roots down.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Last question. We are out of time. Dale, I don't know if you've done any work with fulvic or humic acids. Do they help with plant uptake? Throwing a curveball
Uh,
at you, Dale.
well, I do them. I would say yes for the short answer, but they're in combination with other products. We've been doing a lot of
Okay.
biostimulant work. So
Yep.
um, some of our post-emergent herbicide applications are very stressful on corn and beans. So we tend to include some of these products that help shorten the recovery time. I mean, a plant has metabolized herbicide, and anytime a plant has to divert energy away to defend and repair tissue, as energy that's not there for yield potential. So some of these products do alleviate uh, more the fulvic than the humic. Fulvic's more for foliar. Do help plant recovery. Humic's more for nutrient uptake in the soil. I haven't had as much success with humic, to be honest. Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I just haven't done enough work
Yep.
with it on side by side. I love doing side by side strip trials and to see what
Mm-hmm.
works and what doesn't, and just haven't had a lot of time with it yet.
Yep. Like to Jared's point of either cranking up or pulling back a nutrient potentially for a couple 100 feet, do a side-by-side trial. Give it a
Yeah,
whirl,
yeah.
and Mark, and let us know how it goes. To that end, I will note next week's show, we're going to be talking about beneficial insects. The week after, which is our 200th episode, can you believe it? We're going to be talking about stress on plants and stress relievers. So we're going to talk about abiotic stress, and of course, what, if anything, we can do about it. So Jarrett, Dale, I hope you'll come back in the comment
definitely.
section and watch that show.
Oh.
Be great.
Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Abiotic
Okay.
stress. That's the exciting stuff.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is super exciting
Yes.
stuff. So we'll be back for that. So we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you both so much for sharing your time, your expertise. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining us in the comments and your great questions. And yes, we'll be back next week to talk beneficial insects. So join us 8 p.m. Eastern Monday night. Cheers, everybody.
Wonderful to be on with you, Jared.